So here, what you're seeing on the screen now is what is called the map of consciousness. And this comes from a seminal book called Power versus Force. And what you're seeing here is essentially the entire spectrum of human emotions from the very least to the very highest. So you have shame at the very bottom, and then you have self-realization, enlightenment, Christ consciousness, Buddha consciousness. These are all words for the highest state of human consciousness. And you can see the progression, right? Shame, guilt, grief, fear, pride, courage. And that bottom rung here is what you call the survival frequency. There are three spectrums of consciousness, and they go from survival, service, and surrender. This bottom survival area is where most of humanity resides. And this is the leap that's coming for humanity. It's the leap into the higher realms. It's the leap into service. This is when we begin to ask ourselves the bigger questions. Like, why am I here? What is my soul here to express? How can I be most beneficial to the planet? And you begin to know that you start to move into that because those are the questions that become present for you. And it takes courage, as you see, to get to the upper rung, right? Courage is ultimately strength of heart, and it's what breaks us into the higher realms. We have to have the courage. And the highest state of consciousness is the surrender state. And this is the equivalent of thy will, not my will. And it's just where we allow life to move us. There's a divine intelligence in life. And it's much more intelligent than our arrogant humanness. But yet we fight because we want it our way. And when you let go, it will shatter your ego, and that's a good thing. You know, and when you start to move in that current, you start to move in the current of God. It's intoxicating. You know, it takes a tremendous amount of trust. It takes a tremendous amount of faith. And so what you just experienced there, that the joy, the peace, that's the upper end of human consciousness. So by the lever that we just pulled, we moved ourselves up to the top. And my sense is that the rest of your day will flow nicely, you know. And it's a great place to be, and the lever is awesome, right? To be able to do this in the morning. Now you can take this with you, 2 breaths in, 1 breath out. I do this every morning. It's the way my day gets started because, as Avery mentioned, obviously, you know, it's a cheat sheet to flow or meditation, but the stillness that you can get. I had been meditating for years. You throw this in here, I was able to touch those places that were once in a while in meditation. Just slips you right in. And so it's a very, very powerful practice. Now, what we're seeing, though, is that it's essentially a flow hack. It's a hack, right? It's a hack to get yourself to the top, which is wonderful. I think it's necessary to understand what that feels like because it becomes a reference point for us. But ultimately, we don't just want to hack our way to the top. Okay, on the left-hand side here, you know, these are amazing technologies to get us there. But on some level, it could be a spiritual bypass. It could be a spiritual bypass. And so the real technology comes from the spiritual technology. It's healing the trauma. You know, what happens is the traumas that have occurred through us throughout our life, you know, it might have been some deep anger because there might have been a sexual abuse. And that anchor is there. And it holds you down. And because it was so traumatic, it's lodged in there. And it's vibrating like this. And what happens is that it brings more of those situations to us. And so this is why we get stuck in patterns and cycles. And the only way to truly heal that is we have to be willing to descend. We have to be willing to go into those places inside of us that hurt. And they say that healing is nothing much more than the application of love to the places inside of us that hurt. And so whenever you hit these tender emotions, all your necessity is to love it, is to acknowledge it, to accept it as part of your journey, to love that part, to love your wounds, to love your scars. They made you who you are. And one day I guarantee you that all that pain will turn to honey. And it's a beautiful thing. It's an absolutely beautiful thing. Now, what I'm putting here is obviously the wound healing, the shadow work, and there's a great line from a great poet, Rumi, and what he says is that it is through the wound that the light enters. You know, so when you have those wounds that have hit you at any time, those traumas, you know, and when you descend into them, now you can bring that love into it, and what happens, it literally will move that shadow and turn it into light. And so what it becomes when you become enlightened, it's that it's only light that comes through. You know, the shadows have been dissolved, the trauma has been loved, it's been reconciled. Once it's reconciled, this is what the significance of, you know, self-realization, embodiment, these words. And it's a process. It's an ongoing process. It's a diligent practice. But it's why you incarnated. Because once you touch that core, this is to know the divine in human flesh. This is, you know, Son of Man, Son of God. We are the interface. And the only way to move it from an intellectual understanding and make it visceral, where you feel the divine in you, is that you must be willing to travel in. You know, this is why the great Jesus, you know, to me, he's my great teacher, right? And in the story of the resurrection, right, he says he descends into hell on the first night, and then he rises into the heavens. Has anyone ever considered why he descends into hell first? Because there's a direct correlation between how far you're willing to descend to how high you can ascend, or descend to ascend. There's a direct correlation. You can play shallow, but you can't make these areas your permanent home. The only way to make it a permanent home is you must be willing to die to your old self. You know? And in doing that, you know, this is where we elevate. And it becomes a fragrance that moves out of your energetic body. People will feel that around you. And then people will gravitate to you. It says, gosh, what are you doing? There's something about you now. Has everyone who's been in the Delta been experiencing more and more people coming to you and going, what are you doing? You're looking younger. Right? Because I tell you, I mean, don't do Botox, just cry. I got it from Jessica. All right. It's absolutely a truth, though. It's an absolute truth. 42 years, look. So the other thing that we've been bringing forward here is the gene keys. The Gene Keys is a very profound wisdom. I've been an avid, you know, reader for decades. I've been in the personal development space, I was thinking about this morning, 30 years. My first book got handed to me when I was 13, so I'm 42, so I'm right there. 3 decades, that's going to be fun to say. 3 decades. But when I stumbled onto the Gene Keys about 5 years ago, my world stopped. I didn't pick up another book for about 5 years. It's an absolute game changer. Why? Because it is about activating the DNA inside of you. It's about understanding your shadows, activating those to become your gifts, which is the higher realm, and ultimately to be able to achieve what they call the Siddhic states, the siddhis. The siddhis are an ultimate virtue. It's and they have these beautiful siddhis like majesty and superabundance, and who's got some other ones? Presence. Celebration. Invincibility. Universal love. So that's one of my favorites. and it's beautiful because what it is, it's a map. It's a profile about you at your zenith. You at your absolute most highest peak. And because ultimately the divinity is in us. Our DNA has just been shut down. It's been here. You know, we get dropped as these beautiful, innocent souls into a society that crushes it. It absolutely is mind-boggling, especially for all of our young children. They look at my sons go like, what the heck is going on with this planet? You know, they came to help, you know, and it's a necessity at this point. So the DNA, you know, we're going to start to see a lot more coming out from that standpoint. It's an absolute game changer, and it's one of the things that we started to introduce in the Delta. So here's what I want you to all take away from today: that relationships are the most potent force to reveal your shadows. Okay? They have the alchemical fire and charge in them to bring up the material, right? Once you get past the honeymoon phase, right? And then all of a sudden, it's like all that stuff is starting to come up. And that's the game, right? It's through that dynamic, right? Through the dynamic of interaction with two individuals, this is what happens. We have traumas. You can consider them to be like landmines. So let's say this individual has 4 or 5 years old, happened to be abandoned by his mother. Or the perception was that he was abandoned by his mother. And he's holding that. He's never healed that, right? And so he's got this direct connection to that. It's the abandonment. And over here, we also have the fear of commitment. Perfect. Right? Perfect. And so what happens with these situations is that ultimately, what I like to say is that we're just sort of all unconsciously driving each other towards higher evolution. We have no idea that it's occurring, but it's occurring. So what happens, she says something that sort of has a trigger. Hey, I'm sorry I didn't call you yesterday. It wasn't my intention. I just got really busy and I forgot. In his mind, he's feeling like he was abandoned. He wasn't good enough, right? And so it's like a tripwire. It's a landmine. And she just set it off. Right? And that's exactly how that dynamic works. You know, we can have, and so what I want you to understand too is that, see, everyone has traumas and they have signatures, right? Let's say it's abandonment. Let's say it's an abuse of power. Let's say it's sexual misconduct. Whatever those things are there, right? And so when they're there, if you start to engage in a dynamic and you see, you know, you're in a situation with people, events, or whatever that is, and if the signature of what's going on in your physical reality right now has the signature of abuse of power or sexual misconduct, what happens, it has the same energetic signature as the trauma. And so it sets it off. And the way that humans react is like, you're pissing me off because you're doing that, right? Instead of saying, oh, what just happened? You know, I know you love me, Rosa, but, you know, when you did that, something just went off, and I know it's not your intention, but it really hurts. Gosh, how much better would that be? Yeah. Right? To take responsibility for that's what's arising, because ultimately if you do that to me, and you do that to that individual, maybe I react, this person doesn't. Right? So ultimately it's not your behavior necessarily, but it's because the wound inside of you is getting triggered. Right? And so and they're beautiful. Relationships have the power to do that. Right? And so you can almost look at it from this perspective of the iceberg. Right? Remember the iceberg, 10% conscious, 90% unconscious? All the material is in the unconscious, so you can't see it. And the only way that you can get access to it is through the dynamic, because they piss you off, right? And all that stuff comes up. And when it's there, now you have visibility. So instead of getting upset at these individuals, you could maybe just bow and say, this is a sacred teacher. It's a sacred teacher. Right? A different perspective. Yeah. You know, it really is. It's terrain where you can heal. And that's what I mean. It's just unconsciously driving each other towards higher evolution. You have no idea. Most people have no idea of this dynamic. No clue. And stuff is always moving through and you have no clue, and we keep in a normal upset or what have you. But that's what it essentially looks like, is that the body is the unconscious, right? A lot of times you'll see the depiction of you have the conscious and unconscious mind. I feel the unconscious mind is really the body. It's the supercomputer. And why do I say it's unconscious? Well, because there's like 7 trillion things going on in your body. Do you have any conscious awareness of it? No. Right? So everything is stored inside of the body. And so a lot of times when these wounds come up in the trauma, you might feel it in your womb. You might feel it in your heart, in your neck, and so that's where it's like, that's where that is. And like Avery was mentioning, the right side of the body is always the masculine, the left side is the feminine. So when you have these wounds come up and it feels like it's on the left side, it might be my mother. It might have been my sister that did something. And that's the beginning process of the healing. So what I'm bringing forward with Giving Business Soul is that relationships are the most dynamic thing that we can use to heal. But guess what? Business is a relationship, right? Have you been interacting with your business and your business says to you, who do you think you are? You can't do that. You can't do that volume. So there's a signature of I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. So it's like, okay, well, where is that? And what you always have to understand, you have to be able to get down to the root, right? It's like, where was the origin? We're a society that likes the pill. You don't heal the root. You just heal the symptom. But we have to get away from that, right? We have to be able to go through into those roots. But again, what I'm bringing forward is that business is a way to also heal. It's a way to reconcile those aspects of ourselves that don't feel worthy, that don't feel that we can do it, that we're not meant to. Whatever negative stuff is in there, it gives us an opportunity to look at all that. And so with Giving Business Soul, we just recently launched the Path of the Merchant. It's a pilot program and we have 7 individuals, brave individuals going through it, and where we're introducing these concepts. And so this is the pilot program, so we'll see what comes forward after the fact. But you can see the cool imagery that Jose put together. It's the merchant. The way I look at the merchant, it's an archetype. And what do I mean by an archetype? There's the archetype of the queen. There's the archetype of the king, the warrior, the lover, the maiden. There's all sorts of archetype in our society. A merchant is one. Right? And the merchant is that who is really good at commerce. They're good at business. They're able to see where society needs something and are able to connect things. They're good at being able, they're magnetic at times. And merchants are powerful. Why? Because we wield the power of human ingenuity and getting people together. And how do we get things done here on the planet? It's together in community. Right? And so the merchant, though, has been, it's been going in the wrong direction. It's all about, greed and money and power. It's all the lower realm stuff, right? That bottom chakra at the very base is survival, right? And then this is sex and this is power. Most merchants are about survival, sex, and power. And so what I'm venturing to say is that we need to heal the merchant. And guess what? We're all merchants in our own way. And I believe we are in very, profound times. The ancestors, everything that had to occur to get here, we finally have an opportunity to change the dynamic. Because the current power structure on the planet is business. How do I know that? Just look at who's got the largest buildings. They're the major dominant power structure. But for the first time, before it used to be the kingdoms. They used to be the power source. And then religions. And then government. And now business. But we couldn't maybe do the kingdom. We couldn't create the religions. And we couldn't create governments. But we're all entrepreneurs. Can we change the power dynamic? Yes. Absolutely. And that's what I'm venturing into. So the gene keys, for those that are interested in it, this is sort of the basic understanding of it. You have the gene keys, you have a map, and then you have a voyage that you can take. And inside of that, as I mentioned already, you got gifts, shadows, and cities. And the way that you move through the gene keys is through a process called contemplation. And so, who here is already on the gene keys? Yeah? Okay, so we have a lot of people. Has it been useful?
Yes.
Yeah, incredibly useful.
Yes.
Yeah. I tell you, I mean, it's got to be, I mean, for me, and I think a lot of people who I've introduced it are starting to get that same sensation. It's an absolute game changer. What does it do? It awakens your aura. Science knows we have an aura. Okay, and so what it awakens is that you start to move those shadows into gift. And as that happens, the aura gets brighter and bigger. And you know, it feels like the cup runneth over. Yeah? You know, because when you're shut down, the aura is very small. You know, and it's in survival. You know, and all of a sudden, and it's like, you know, and you can do that through the gene keys. So, not only as individuals can we rise in consciousness, but also from a business perspective. This chart here is the map of evolution as it relates to human organizations. And just in the same way as you saw the map, which you see behind there, at the very base you have what they call red organizations. Everything is about power, fear, it's all chaotic. It's all about, an example of that would be mafia, militia. You know, there's just public displays of brutality, right? Lawlessness, no real structure. And this was more, let's say, further back, right? And then the leap forward was when we went into the yellow. And this is where hierarchies started to develop, chains of command. And so when you start having hierarchies and chains of command, then you can have projects over long term. People know their roles and what has to be done. So you have some sort of stability and control. What type of organizations are this? Governments, traditional churches, schools, very hierarchical. Who likes hierarchies? You know, when something happens at your daughter's school and you got to go and do something, it's like, oh man, it's terrible, the process to try to get something done. The next leap forward was when we went into the orange. And it was a huge leap, right? Because wealth on an epic level started to be created because the hierarchy was still intact, but now instead of nepotism in the prior model, where it depends who you know, that's how you move up the scale. Well, with the orange, meritocracy was born. So depending on your merit and how hard you worked, you got to move up, right? But when you kind of bring that forward, then this is where greed starts to take hold, right? But this is the template of the modern world. This is your Nikes, these are your Walmarts, you know, very hierarchical, multinational, mechanical, no real heart, no real soul. Let's just create needs so we can keep growing. Who's been watching the, what's her name, from the climate, the young lady? Did you guys see that?
Yes.
That's amazing, right? But you know, and then she said something to the effect of like, you know, it's like the United Nations, all it is economic growth at any cost, and she's like, what are we doing? It makes zero sense. The next level up is the green organizations, heart-based, Ben & Jerry's, Southwest. They feel different, right? You go to Southwest and you know everyone's laughing, and it's just kind of a different vibe. You know, the hierarchies now become more like a family scenario. You know, everyone's opinion is important. There's a lot of empowerment. It's a lot more about culture over strategy, and you know, it's again shared values, a lot of engagement. And then the next level up is a teal, and this is where we are currently in the teal sort of phase. And this is where organizations are starting to represent organisms, right? It's in the etymology, organism, organization. And so there's this aspect of going back into nature, right? And it's got essentially 3 principles that make up a teal organization. And there's organizations like this already operating. And this is when the power structure of the hierarchy is flattened, and instead of having, you know, one person at the top sort of leading the way, it's more like everyone is empowered, everyone is autonomous, everyone's intelligent, and whoever's closest to the client makes the decision. You don't have to wait till your boss tells you what to do, right? Because what happens in the predecessor model, it's the assumption in the hierarchies that people lie, cheat, and steal, and we got to create processes to keep everything in checks and balances, right? And with the other model, with the teal, it's like everyone's intelligent, and let's empower people. And then you have like a hierarchy. Everyone is a leader inside of the organization. It's a culture of wholeness. What is a culture of wholeness? That means that all of you is welcomed when you're productive and when you're not productive. I hear some whims in that, right? And I mean, that's very common in the real estate industry, right? It's like, unless you're producing right now, you're not really valued for us. And so we're not going to put up a lot of attention. It's like, can you produce for us? If not, you got to move out. And it lacks humanness. And the culture of wholeness is welcoming you as an individual, as a human, understanding that life has its ups and downs, and that it's okay. And we give people the space to go through what they need to while we still love them. And then the organization is also got this evolutionary impulse. And this has been the hardest for me. What evolutionary impulse means is that you have to allow the organization to move on its own. And that means that when you set the intention for yourself and your organization and your business, you have to let that intention, it's like a seed. And that seed contains all the ingredients necessary, right? And it's our role as leaders to nourish that. And the more selfless that intention, it's going to be the more powerful. So it takes time to germinate, right? It's like the sunflower and the yew tree. The sunflower reaches full height in a year. The yew tree, it takes about a year just to sort of bust out, but it can last up to 3,000 years. And that's really what it is when you set a selfless intention. And what that means then is that as that thing is sprouting, we just need to be the stewards and the gardeners of that energy. And versus, I'm the leader, I know best, I want to do $1 million home sales, right? And they're not coming. And all then we're starting to get is, the 250, 300 in San Bernardino. Right? And it's like, hey, well, I want these, but what's coming is the other. And so it's like, well, my intention was to be of service and to help as many people as I can. So then it's coming, and I'm going, no, I want this one. And that's where, every single business book will be anti that. We will it. We dictate and we control. Right? But that's all just masculine imposing its will on life. And life is organic. It blooms out. And again, we're just the gardeners of that. So that is the teal. And now the next leap in evolution, which is what Giving Business Soul has the blueprint, is the next level up. And it's a violet organization. It's a violet organization. And it's the highest evolution as I see it. And so the Mortgage Phoenix Group is a violet organization in maturation. It is currently in the process. And what does that mean? Essentially means this. Look, we have had two basic types of organizations on the planet up until this point. Right? We have our businesses and our nonprofits. Business is masculine. It's a masculine energy. It's always about getting stuff done. It's logical. It's linear. Right? It just wants to grow. But when it's wounded, it has an undertone of aggression. It doesn't care. It doesn't care. It's like, I don't care about that rainforest. I need to get to the top of the hierarchy. I need more money in my bank. 5 million isn't enough. 10 million is enough. It's got that energy behind it. And as a result, the world shows up in the way that it does. Right? And then we have our nonprofit organizations. These are more feminine in nature. We can call these philanthropic, right? Philanthropy, philos anthropos, the love of humanity. It's got a feminine texture in it, right? What are nonprofit organizations about? Taking care of people, making sure everyone's taken care of, making sure everyone's nurtured. And these organizations, although beautiful, they haven't quite achieved the height possible. And so what I'm suggesting is that we bring those two into union. Just how Avery mentioned about our ancestors and our the feminine line and our father line, it's about bringing those together. We have both poles in us, right? And so what I'm suggesting is bringing both of those energies into union within one organization. But here's the critical component. The feminine has to be first, right? Why? Well, because when you look out into nature, the feminine's always first. You don't have existence without the womb. Nothing comes into the earth plane without coming through a womb. So why would not the feminine be first? Nature's our greatest teacher. God has woven signatures all over, right? And so when we have the feminine as the inception and leading the way, we have this love, we have the heart. And then you use the masculine mind to move that forward, right? And when you lead with heart, you have harmony. And this mind is moving this agenda. How are we set right now? Don't destroy the rainforest. Don't pollute the oceans. We need to grow. And that's why the world shows up in the way that we do. We have had separation in organizations just in the same way that we have had separation within our own self. We have both energies. And until we come into union, we do not know God. The union between the poles is what makes you recognize your own divinity. And in that same way, I feel that if we do that, if we bring union between these two types of opposing forces and bring them into union, then I believe we have a blueprint for a new humanity. And that's what we're striving for here. And this is what this movement is all about. It's for the love of humanity. It's not for profit. And whoa. So, this is the violet, right? It's the 4 quadrants. It's leading with philanthropy while having a culture of wholeness, having its own evolutionary impulse, and having an organization that self-manages and self-organizes itself. And now there's one additional component, and that'll be released in the path of the merchant, because, see, when you look out into nature, it's got natural mathematics in it. Everything is an iteration of the other. You look at a conch shell, you look at a solar system, you look at everything in between, those are iterations, right? Everything looks like a pattern of the other. And so there is a ratio called the phi ratio. Have you guys all seen the Venturian Man, Leonardo da Vinci? Mm-hmm. Okay. What he is signaling there is that harmonic law, right? And guess what? Our entire bodies are in that same mathematical breakdown. And what I mean by that is if you divide your shoulder length by this part here, you get the ratio. You divide this finger by this, you get the ratio. Your entire body is woven with the ratio. Everything is woven in the ratio. So I believe that if we are to have harmony within an organization, there has to be a natural mathematic flow that's in that same way. And that's the way the Phoenix is designed. It's designed with the ratio that has a certain amount that goes to philanthropy, certain amount that goes to profit. I'm not suggesting that we're saying it's all going to be all philanthropic. There's money to be made. But it's love and humanity first. And that is the distinguishing factor.